Alas.
Yeah.
So I think we will get started. I'll take a
Yeah,
moment
sure.
to introduce
Mhm.
myself. My name is Tara Fogel. I am the K-8 Science Coordinator. And here we have Andy Bramante.
Hi, I'm the science research teacher and the junior innovators teacher at Greenwich High School.
And
How
we're
are you
excited to
guys?
have some students and parents on to learn more about the eighth grade elective Junior Innovators. A little bit of background. This is going to be the third year that we are running the course. Is it third already? It is, huh? Fourth. Oh, the
Mm.
fourth year that we are running the Junior Innovators course.
That's fast. Yeah.
Too fast. And we are just pitching this as a information session, a Q&A, really to answer any questions that students may have lingering. Teachers did post information about the Junior Innovators course, the application process, as well as the documents that accompany the application on their Science Google Classrooms for student access. We obviously have many parents joining us tonight, so I just want to let parents know that applications will not be sent directly to you. This is obviously a large undertaking for students, so we do give student ownership over all of the documentation, the responsibility for kind of doing that work. So it is only posted on Google Classrooms. Your child would have to go ahead and show that information to you, but we open this up as a Q&A and kind of an opportunity for Mr. Baranti to go ahead and give an overview of what the course is all about, what it means in terms of student independent work completion, and then a little bit of what the opportunities are afforded to students should they be able to make it through the application process and join the cohort.
Mhm.
I'm going to
Okay.
turn it over to Mr. Bramante, and we do have an open Q&A, and this is recorded, will be posted on Google Classrooms and the Greenwich website for any parents who are accompanying their students to the Central Middle School or Eastern Middle School orchestra and band concerts tonight. So
Awesome.
take it away, Mr.
All
Bramante.
right. Do you mind if I share my screen? May
Please
I?
do.
Okay. All right. So no one wants to read my email. Not a good idea. Okay, so let's get started. So I thought I'd take an opportunity to just go over, the class itself, the application, and then I would imagine most of the other stuff will just flush out with the quick Q&A. But my name's Andy Bramante. I'm the teacher for the Junior Innovators as well as the science research class, and that's my email if you need to reach me. As Vogel said, this is the fourth year. It goes quick. This is the fourth year that the course will be running, and it's an elective. And so the way it looks like it'll be happening, the goals of the class are really to provide students with a unique experience to take part in a STEM elective that is really innovative, personalized, and project based. So it's so different than a regular class, which is traditional in curriculum. And I would say the experiences, the laboratory experiences really run along or are supportive of the curriculum and the things that are being learned, unit to unit, let's say. This is very different. This is essentially a course where your child will essentially pick a project of their own choosing and really drive that process, from origination, writing the methodology on how to actually to carry out the experiments, uh, run the experiments, interpret the data, and then essentially, if all goes well, writing that up for participation, hopefully in some sort of a science fair. And we can talk more about that later. But essentially, the time looks like it will still be 7 to 7:45 in the morning. So we call that block zero. Um, and that is basically one. So in a given week, each middle school will come to the high school once. So on the way it has been for the past 3 years is on Monday would be Eastern Middle School, Tuesday would be Central, and Wednesday would be Western Middle School. And so the application is open to all current seventh graders. So those applications, which I'll talk about in a second, are evaluated, and essentially we're limiting this to 8 students per middle school. And so just as a heads up, on those days where your son or daughter is coming to the high school, there is a bus that will take them to their middle school. So the expectation is that parents will drop the students off at the high school at 5:07. The doors open at 7, and then at 7:45 or somewhere in that neighborhood, the bus leaves the high school to go to the Eastern Middle School on Monday, Central Middle School Tuesday, and Western Middle School on Wednesday. So, what is Junior Innovators? It's really a very unique opportunity to explore student interests. What is your son or daughter's curiosities or interests, and what are the things that really cause them to not sleep at night in terms of, something that they might have seen in science, or something that some issues that they've noticed, whether it's in medicine, the environment, math, computer science, things that really get them thinking, and to the extent where they think they can make an improvement on what currently exists. So we're really challenging the kids to really come up with something that is their own. And the reason we do that is, usually if it's something that, where your son or daughter has so much of self-interest, that will drive the whole process. It's really about them coming up with an idea that really interests them, and not something that they think, for example, might win a science fair. Those are entirely two different things. One is, you can liken it to one where the dog is walking forward, and the other one is that the dog is being controlled by the back end of the quarry, and that's not so, the skills that they learn really do transcend science. What we're trying to do is teach your son or daughter to really come up with an idea, articulate their ideas, superimpose on what currently exists, carry out a project, and communicate it. And those are skills that really transcend a career in science. So many of the kids that have gone through Junior Innovators and then the high school science class, research class, have gone into all walks of life, some are more expected. You think, all right, science, it would be medicine, it would be engineering, it would be math. But there are kids that become lawyers, kids that become politicians. And really, what we try to do is teach kids how to think, how to think and how to articulate. So come on, click. All right, let's see why we're not clicking. There we go. All right, so we're going to create this cohort for 25-26, and so the applications are due on June 6, 2025, which is coming up. Projects the expectation is the projects will be completed within the school year, and your son or daughter will be able to take part in perhaps the Connecticut Science and Engineering Fair, and that has potential paths to what's called the Genius Olympiad, which is an international fair. And then the big one is the Thermo Fisher Junior Innovators Challenge, which is really, if to get to that point is really life changing. It is that impactful, for a young scientist or a young researcher. So I'll explain how that sort of comes about. So, the timeline is really in this application that we're, expecting your child to do, they are coming up with an idea, right? And so what we do, if they're accepted, is in September, we refine that idea because it gets to the point where it has to start happening in the lab. And that's really, I run the class, whether it's the high school or the Junior Innovators class, with the science fair guide timelines as a guide. And the reason I do that is I want to give your child, the opportunity to complete the work and then take part in that science fair. The course is not Science Fair 101, but make no mistake, if the research is good, there's nothing better than actually having your child articulate that to other scientists and peers. And that whole exercise is really pretty fascinating. So students can deviate from the original idea if they go away for the summer and find something else that really piques their interest. That's a change is okay, but they have to really start to come up with a research plan, certainly with my help by the end of October, because if they want to take part in the state science fair, those applications are due December 1st to the state science fair. And the reason for that is they want to basically review what your child is doing, not to the extent that it's great research or not, but really to know that they're not doing anything dangerous. So they really want to know what we're doing in the lab and how we're going to do it. And so that sort of has to happen in November, and then we write it up and submit it December 1st. And so for those that are not participating in a science fair in the state fair, there's also the middle school science fair, which we just had over the weekend, and that's in May. So slightly elongated, more relaxed timeline for those kids. So grading rationale is pretty simple. I won't bore you with these details other than to say, if students working, grades are not an issue. If the student's not working, grades are an issue. Really that simple. There is a midterm. We have a midterm, which is really a 5 to 7 minute slide presentation. And the reason I do that, it's during midterms for the high school, which I think it pretty much aligns with the middle school. And that's an opportunity for me to ask your child to start to really collect the information that they've created, start to think about the story, think about, what the goals were, think about the process, and think about how to start to collate everything to articulate the findings. And so, that's January, which really isn't that far off from the end of February when the science fair really starts to kick off. So and a final exam is literally just an extension of the midterm, where it's just tell me what you did for the whole year. So the application is pretty straightforward in principle, but it does ask your son or daughter to really start to think about what interests them and what they might want to do in this very unique class. So the first thing I asked for, well, it's due June 6th, and that would simply be by email would be fine. Again, we limit it to 8 students per middle school. So this year we have I believe it's maybe one short of 8 per school. So we've got 23 kids in the program. And it has grown in popularity, both in application and enrollment over the 3 years. So I need your, name, middle school, email address, so I can notify the child of the selection decision. I do ask about the activities that, that the student, intends to take part in, to the extent that I really want to know, if I see that it's really an incredible amount of commitments, I want to have an honest conversation with your child to say, hey, this may or may not work. I would certainly set the expectations for the amount of time it would take. The course is basically 45 minutes per week. But make no mistake, the kids that you see that are successful, and by successful, in my my opinion of success is that a student really comes up with an idea and carries out an experiment, whether it fails or it doesn't, and then really we talk about what has happened throughout the year. That is success in the research class. But a greater success would be that they finish a project and start to talk about science fair participation and junior innovators challenge and things of that nature. That type of commitment, it's going to sound redundant, is a commitment. It is basically time on the weekends when it gets busy, time during the holiday break, and even into the evenings. As the season gets busy, which I would say starts in the end of November, January, February, I'm there till 6 or 7 o'clock every day. And so I give students the opportunity to sort of weave time in, around their other activities to come in and do some of the work. I do not ask students to come in. It really is an independent process. So it's all about, students finding the time to really finish what they, the research that they want to conduct.
Hey, Andy, just before you move on to the next portion of the application,
Mhm.
I just want to
Sure.
remind parents there is a Q&A button at the bottom. Mike let me know that a few parents have raised their hands. You can go ahead and start typing questions in. I'll
Sure.
moderate a question and answer, and once Andy's done presenting, I'll kind of read the
Yeah.
question aloud for the good of the group to hear, and then either Andy
Perfect.
or I will go ahead and address it. But parents, you have access to the typed Q&A at the bottom. You can lower your hands and go ahead and type your questions in, and then we will answer them in the order in which they were received after Andy has finished his spiel.
Perfect.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Thanks. I also asked for science teachers' names, just in case, what I'm trying to who the child I'm looking for is that student that can articulate, can come up with something that really interests them and that can actually have 2 skill sets. One, working on their own, independent work is very important, but also working in a group is very important, because what tends to happen is the kids become, while it's independent and individual in terms of the projects themselves, they are very supportive of one another. And it becomes really a little family within each cohort. So I'm looking for the students that would thrive in that environment. So the application itself, should be a proposal in any area that interests them, science, math, engineering, the weather, medicine. It really doesn't matter. You know, the low-hanging fruit that tends to that I tend to see is that there's a lot of environmental. There's been a lot of microplastic work in the recent years. I would look elsewhere. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, if you really have an innovation in microplastics, that's great. You know, it's fine. But that tends to be, you know, what you know kids gravitate towards, you know, at the beginning, you know, very easily. So you know, let your mind wander, look around. You can look at middle school, you know, physical and life sciences, which are the two categories that the Connecticut Engineering Fair has. And those are the links to the abstracts from previous years. Look around and see what other kids, you know, at the eighth grade level are doing. I will caution you, you know, you could look at what the previous junior innovators have done, and you probably will notice that the complexity is a little higher in the Greenwich kids. And I attribute that to having access to this amazing lab at the high school. Because all, you know, all of a sudden, you know, they have, you know, the toys in the lab are not the projects, but they sure are pretty darn good tools for, you know, providing evidence for the, you know, for the types of things that you develop in one of these little, you know, research projects. So go to the science fair. Science News is another one. Science Daily is another. Science News is run by the Society for Science in the Public, which is it's really the agency that runs all of these science fairs, whether it's ICEF, whether it's Regeneron, or whether it's the Junior Innovators Challenge. So check all that stuff out and see, you know, see what happens. So I'm looking for an introduction. You know, what is the problem? You know, what are the issues that, you know, are really being discussed here? You know, so if it's a diagnostic test for a disease, tell me a little bit about the disease. Tell me a little bit about what the current, you know, state of affairs is in terms of detection and why this portable rapid test might be so sorely needed, right? And then you talk about your purpose, hypothesis, or if it's an engineering project, just tell me what you want to do. Tell me your engineering goals. And the hardest part will be the methods. You know, how do you anticipate going about it? And this will be, it's difficult, you know, just to give you some, you know, give you a frame of reference. A lot of the projects, once they're done, the kids are delving into literature to really piece together their processes in terms of making, whether it's making nanomaterials, whether it's making, you know, coating a solar cell, it really doesn't matter. You go into literature and try to find this. And that's very difficult if you've never done it before. So what I want to stress is that I'm looking for creativity, imagination, and the expression of both. You know, I'd rather see that than a regurgitation of something that was on NPR a week before, for example. You know, just tell me what you're interested in. Give me an idea how you might carry it out. As I read it and I'm intrigued by it, I can probably spin around a bunch of different ways that, you know, it can be done, and it may be different, maybe it's not, but that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a really cool idea, a real honest effort in terms of trying to figure out what exists and what can be done. So if you could put some references in there about, you know, what you've looked at, in terms of what, you know, how you sort of came about your ideas, whether it's web links, whether it's literature, whether it's a book, magazine, it doesn't really matter. And then how you might think about or forward your ideas over the summer so that, you know, the goal is that you start in the fall and you start, you know, right away, right? Because, you know, it seems like it's a year, but, you know, I've already given you an indication that, you know, these projects have to be done by the end of February if you want to do a state science fair. So that's really half a year. Any equipment that you might need, estimated costs, that's always a bit difficult. And the whole proposal should be no more than 5 pages. You know, if it's longer, that's great. If it's shorter, you know, essentially, I don't like giving page limits because then it sort of sets a target in number of words, and it really shouldn't be that at all. It should be just, you know, quality and content, I guess is what I'd like to say. So that's it. You know, I could go through the rest of this, but there's really, you know, we could talk about that probably in Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can Let's see.
I will, in the chat, I will include the link to Andy's slides
Okay.
for every question that comes up in the chat. I just want to answer a
Mhm.
few logistic questions that came in. So many questions right now about busing and about scheduling and about zero block and about start time. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to give the caveat here. We do not have, well, obviously the BOE voted on the change in start times to the high school, which then obviously trickles into the change in start times for the other schools. We don't have exact timing of when the course will start between 7:05, go to 7:45, 7:55. What I can
Mhm.
tell you is that the course will run in the morning, so long as the schedule change stays as it is placed right now. The course will run once per week for each of the three schools, and there definitely will be a bus from the high school to each of the three middle schools for the students who need it on the day that they are assigned. What we have done in the past for students in the science elective is they get to their middle schools before middle school is starting, so there is no interruption with the middle school schedule. Many students who apply to the Science Junior Innovators elective also test into or are already scheduled for a zero block math course. I think I have at least one question in here, if I'm not mistaken, Morgan. If you are in a zero block math course and you are admitted into the Junior Innovators program, you will get a phone call in the summer from either me, Bonnie O'Regan, or Mike Reed, and we will have a one-on-one conversation. And we'll say, listen, you're accepted into both courses. What that means is you will be missing math once per week. Depending on who the math teacher is and based on the course that you're enrolled in, Andy and the math teachers generally communicate and ensure that this is able to be handled by all parties. We do let parents and students know that that is a choice you are making and a commitment that you are making for independent time outside of both your math and your science elective. And it's something that you have to think strongly about and then decide whether or not that is right for you. The teachers and the courses have never made it preventative for students to find success. Some students find other commitments outside of just those courses to be troublesome in terms of their time management. But in the past, over the past 3 years, there has not been an issue with students doing both. So I think that answers quite a few of these questions. Let me just go ahead and answer those live. So Morgan asked about the zero block. Oscar asked about a book or the bus ride into middle school. It will not dig into first period. What time do we need to be at our respective schools? So the bus is only from the high school to the middle school. Parents and students need to have their own transportation to the high school for the beginning of class by 7 o'clock. There is only a bus to the middle schools. There is no bus at the beginning of the course, only from the course to the middle school. Let's keep going. So, what if more than 8 students per school apply? How do you make your final selection?
Mm, okay, that's for me, huh?
Yeah, that one's you. Take it away.
I thought that was a rhetorical question. Well, yeah, I basically what I do, and it's the same process for the high school, is I essentially grade each one of the applications, and I grade it for creativity, ingenuity, original thought, and really the success of the idea given given the lab that we have. So what that kind of says is that if your student has an idea, it might not be a bad idea to sort of pass it by me, send me an email, say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of, and a lot of kids have done that already. And so essentially I'd like to see something that we can attain, and or something where the interest is there and we could sort of pivot into an idea that is doable. But if it's something on CRISPR PCR that we can't do, that's somewhat of a showstopper, and I would potentially, I'd like to reach out to the student and say, hey, we can't do this, can you come up with something else? So that might be a good idea to sort of shortcut that up front.
Yeah, and I think one of the parents or students that actually typed in, is it possible to get feedback on project ideas before submitting an application? So yes, you can email Mr. Bermonti, but
Yeah,
then
sure.
on Google Classrooms, what we obviously have junior innovators at all 3 of our middle schools, and we
Mhm.
will elect junior innovators who are going to be open and ready to also get some questions from their peer student 7th graders and be able to kind of support from that lens. So it's not just adult support, but also peer support to help students ask some of the
Mhm.
questions that may be best answered from one of their peers.
Yep.
All right. And then we have another one. Does a period get taken away and become a free period if you are picked for junior innovators? I think the idea of free period is kind of a high school idea. You are not removing a class from your middle school schedule to take this course. This is an additional elective. It does not replace your eighth grade science course. You
Right.
are still responsible for your eighth grade science course, which is different than zero block math, which does replace your middle school math course. So
Yeah.
no period will be taken away. You do not get an extra flexor or AB
Yeah.
for doing junior innovators. Great
Hmm.
question.
Excellent. You could
Uh,
take the next science research. What does it look like
yeah.
at the high school?
Yep.
Very different. And it kind of runs with the next question. The junior innovators class is once per week for 45 minutes. And so, if for the kids, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've had the top physical science and the top life science projects in the state, and those kids worked extraordinarily hard. The rhythm to their schedule, it's different for all of them. And they're all sports, they're all music. So it can work. But the idea is, once the schedule starts to get busy, this February deadline is real. And so if the ideas and the projects have traction, then the student has to decide whether or not they want to commit to finishing it. And so I make it, as simple as I can, where I have these extra times in the lab, whether it's in the evening, whether it's on the weekends or during breaks. And I say, hey, I'm here, and I basically send out text to say, Mr. Bermonti's going to be there on Saturday from 10 to 4. Whether students come, it's really their choice, but so is it is it, so difficult that it would, it gets, it sort of takes time from all the other commitments? No, but it really, it does take a commitment. Now, as far as the high school goes, it's very different in that the high school runs on a block schedule, and if you take research, it's either block 4, 5, or 6. So you get to meet in class time 6 hours per 8-day cycle. So that's very different. And so there's a lot more time. And so the projects tend to be much bigger, much more complex, because the idea is you've got a lot more time in school. But make no mistake, the kids that are successful at the high school do the same thing. And what I'd like to throw out there is that for those kids that really dig what they're doing and really are committed to it, it's not work. It is fun. These kids come in because they want to. Try not trying to entice you, but we have parties on the weekend. We make it fun. We make it a community, and oh, by the way, we do a lot of work. And so, but it is it's a lot of fun, and your son or daughter will love it if they really choose to get involved.
All right. And then I have another question about the gear or the lab. So what do we have in the lab? What are the fun toys? And
Oh boy.
I responded to that there are some slides about it, but I didn't know if you wanted to.
I can, if you want me to do that real quick. Sure. Why
Yeah.
not? Um,
And in the meantime, I believe all the other questions were answered live. So if you have any other questions, please go ahead and continue to type them in and
okay.
we will continue to answer them.
All right. So here we have many FTIRs, which are spectrometers that measure how bonds vibrate and as a function of infrared light. And so that is it's almost like a fingerprinting of chemicals and compounds. So gets a lot of use in the lab. We have an electron microscope, which is usually for universities and corporations. So we luckily have one of those. Down at the bottom left is a near infrared spectrometer. Off in the corner is a fluorescent spectrometer. So we have a lot of neat toys. Let me see if I always have problems clicking. There we go. Oh, no, that's not the one. Oh, that's the only one I have here. We also have, I could list it off to you. We have HPLCs, and that's basically separation and detection of mixtures in the liquid phase. We have gas chromatography, which is very similar, but in the gas phase, we have an optics bench. So if your son or daughter is interested in light and solar cells and things of that nature, this year we had a student actually make a coating for a standard solar cell that basically took UV light, which a solar cell does not respond to, and what we call redshift it, turn it into longer wavelengths so the solar cell would respond on UV radiation that leaks through the atmosphere. And it was really compelling. And she basically had this whole bench to herself where she had optics all over the place with lamps. It was a lot of fun. Fluorescence, we have a lot of fluorescence spectrometers. No, I'm forgetting something. We have all the stuff to do cell cultures, incubators, things like that. So
One
not a whole
specific
lot.
question is, are there any lab items that can help with coding?
Coding, as in AI coding, I'm assuming.
Um, Yusuf, if you want to add a clarifying comment in there that we can answer your question more specifically, go for it. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no. I mean, my background is analytical chemistry, and so when students come to me with ideas, I can sort of see the back end of those ideas in terms of how the evidence might be created, and so that's my strong suit. I've gotten pretty good at the biology aspect of things, but I'm not a programmer. I will tell you that straight away. And so that does not mean we haven't had students, both at the junior innovators and at the high school level that have, this year, one of the kids that I brought along to ISEF did a multimodal analysis of for Alzheimer's detection. And so in that particular case, you have clinical data where a subject would basically answer a question about what they see in a cartoon, for example, or the linguistics of how they use verbs and stutter and stall as they're talking. That's all clinical data. And then there's genetic data, and then there's MRI data, and no one, to this point was able to take all those different modes and put them together in an AI approach. And so, my contribution to that for the student was to get him access to a really sophisticated database from the Alzheimer's, one of the leading Alzheimer's associations, and he was off and running. How he learned it, a lot of that is learned on their own. So you might want to think about taking some courses over the summer. The kids tell me there's a lot online to self-study, even on YouTube, things like that. So, but that really will shake out whether you're really interested in it or not, because the kids that I've had that do well with that are they really, get it and get into it and spend a lot of time with it. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. I did just type in an answer to one, I believe it was a student who may have joined a little bit late. What kind of requirements are there for the proposal? I linked to the slides and I let you know that the Google Classroom video recording of Mr. Bramante already explaining will definitely help with that, as well as
Yeah,
the proposal
sure.
document itself. But any follow-up questions can go directly to Mr. Bramante himself. There's nothing he loves more than being inundated by emails now that the fair season is over.
Yeah, yeah. So the idea, I mean, basically is that I will, go through these things. It usually takes about a week or two to go through them. So you can anticipate, those cohorts will get formed before the end of school, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think our goal on the postings was by the 12th, understanding that students' last day is the 16th, or 17th, depending on
Yeah, something like that. Okay.
so the goal is to get them out to you guys by then. And again, zero block math students, you will get personally contacted by myself, Mike, or Bonnie. We usually divide and conquer just to make sure you've
Sure.
got a touch point with somebody downtown who can help you understand that this is a choice that you are making.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
There's usually a bunch of kids, right? I mean, this year there's quite a handful.
what, 4 or 5 at least?
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
all in
So,
different courses. That's the thing, because there's so
yeah.
many different levels of zero block math.
Mhm.
And I will say, despite the budget challenges, we are dedicated to running these programs, both
Yeah.
Innovators and
Mhm.
the zero block math.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions coming in right now,
Oh,
but if
okay.
you have them, we'll stay on for another minute or two and check that out.
Mhm.
Again, this will be recorded, and on your school-based Google Classrooms or your school-based emails, I can even send it out to students and teachers, or sorry, students and parents, will be the names and email addresses of students who are available to be contacted from their
Okay.
school-based peers.
If you'd like, I can go through some of those slides on what the science fair looks like, or
Oh yeah, I think that's a great idea. We have some time.
yeah,
Sure,
why not?
perfect.
Let me share again. Let's see. So, can you guys see it? All right, so this is essentially what the state science fair looks like, and it's pretty large. It's about 400 projects for both the middle school and the high school. And the way it has changed, specifically with respect to after, during and after COVID. What I mean by that is essentially now the preliminary rounds are done online, over the internet on a Zoom call. And the reason they sort of they were they enjoyed that option is in the past, a student would just bring their poster, and the only students that and then leave, and the only ones that were invited back were the finalists or the top 20%. So you had a lot of kids that would just plop a poster down and go pick it up with very little feedback. So it's a good idea in that regard. And so it's two phases. The first phase is a preliminary judging. You get about 5 minutes to talk about what you've done, and then about 5 minutes of questions. And if you're fortunate enough to be selected, you become a finalist, and then you go in person and you basically talk about your project in front of one, two, or three judges. So here's Margaret many years ago talking about her project. So we physically print a board. You bring your binder, you bring your paper, you bring any types of images that you might want to show, and here you've got about 10 minutes to tell your story. So it's a little easier because you have more time. And so, year to year, we've had a lot of success. I just want to get into this other piece of it, but all I can say is there are many categories to the fair. There's environmental, there's chemistry, there's physics, there's math. And so you have these categories, and year to year, we usually have kids finishing on top of each category or near it and coming home with some lovely trophies. This is the other piece that I wanted to talk about, and this is the Junior Innovators Challenge, which used to be called the Broadcom Challenge or something like that. And so essentially what has to happen is your son or daughter goes to the state fair and is picked as the top, I believe it's the top 15% of the projects in middle school. And essentially they are now nominated to essentially apply to the Junior Innovators Challenge. It has the same name, but it is very different. This is the national competition where I'd say over 1,000 kids apply from the US. They're selected or nominated to apply. You can't apply independently. And then it basically is you send your paper. Well, really now it's not a paper any longer. It's essentially you take that poster and you shorten it to really tell the highlights of what you've done. And it's also a very holistic application where they want to know about the student. What are the activities that they're taking part in? How do they make it fit? They have to answer some questions about unrelated problems that we face as a society to really start to pull out, the students' ideas and hear about how they see things. And it's almost like a mini college application, if you will. And so last year we had I think there are 10 kids, 9 or 10 kids that went to the state fair from our Junior Innovators cohorts, the combined cohorts. And 4 of them got picked to be nominated, which was pretty incredible. And 3 of them, I don't know if you could see the green circles here, 3 of them were finalists. So to give you some perspective, you go from 2,000 or so down to 300, which are their semifinalists, and now you have 30 finalists. And Greenwich Public Schools had 3 of 30. 10% doesn't sound like a lot on a quiz, but it's a whole lot for 30 from a nation. So it was a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun going down there to see them articulate their ideas, and they did very well. Mackenzie or Mackie came in second in science, $2,000, I think. Micah, $3,000 for her efforts. And I have to close this question box because I can't see it. But Tyler won $10,000 for his idea to create an iodine deficiency test, which was born of his own history, his own health history. And so this is just give you an idea, this is what a poster looks like from the Junior Innovators Challenge to go to the state fair. So kids will look at this and go, oh my God, that looks like so much work, but it really is not. Once you start to go through the process, you're almost looking for space to stick everything that you did into the poster. But and so this is an example, and this is the project that won the $10,000 at the national competition. This was Micah's, which did, almost as well. And her idea walking through the door was to somehow, just to give you an idea of how this, how this all comes together. Micah wrote an application or a proposal about indoor air quality and how concerned she was because of secondhand smoke and sprays and detergents and you name it. There's so many things in our house that shouldn't be there. And so she wanted to come up with a way to really, in a very effectively and very cheaply and easily clean that air. So we started talking about it, and we have a gas chromatograph in the lab, and that's essentially what she used. So before she walked through the door, she knew very little about gas chromatography, but the idea was there. The idea was really cool, was really solid. She was very interested, and so we sort of look around the room and we start to think about the technologies that would fit in terms of providing evidence for the innovation. And at the end of the day, she took, I don't think it was a $20 dehumidifier that we got on Amazon. And then we put a charcoal filter on it. And the notion of the charcoal filter as we paid for it and bought it from Amazon, it was $1. And it was, they were selling them so you stick it in your garbage can so your garbage can wouldn't smell so bad. So that was kind of cool to put those two things together, and the results were spectacular. Mackie, on the other hand, I don't have her poster. She came into the lab talking about how her dog was sick, and they couldn't figure out why. And it turned out when they finally drilled down, it was coming from the food, and there were preservatives in the food that were making her dog sick. And so we started looking at things that are in dog food that shouldn't be there. And that was her project, was to identify one that was really one of the nastier ones that is really not, it's not outlawed, it's not, but you shouldn't be using it as a type of, it's really the story. And a lot of the popular dog foods were. And so that was her project. So, if what are the commonalities to all three of those things? A personal interest, a personal story, and so, when these things are delivered, whether it's at a science fair or a national competition, this the personal piece of it is as much or is as important as the science itself. And this is really what I stress to kids is when you start to talk about your research, you're telling a story. You're starting at the beginning, how you got interested, why you got interested, and you talk through the difficulties that currently exist, and then your innovations towards fixing that. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Any new questions in there?
No, I think that was a super helpful overview.
Yeah.
I always like to share that Broadcom Masters
It was, yes, the
name,
Masters. Yeah.
changed their name in 2023. Interestingly enough, we created this course in 2022.
Yes.
And I don't know that it was a coincidence so much as we could have trademarked something, Mr. Beramonte, because we came up
But,
with pre-chat
you know,
GPT.
it's funny because they, when I went down there, it was kind of weird, because I hadn't, every time they have the talent search, I can never go because it's at the same time as the state fair. And so it's the same people, same party. And I said, oh, I'd like to come to the Junior Innovators Challenge. Can you get me a dinner ticket? And they said, well, no, it's for the parents only. It's too bad. But I went down there anyway, and I got really involved. And so the end of the story is I was on some panels with how do I approach what I do for my kids, and what do I, how do I guide them, how do I coach them. And I always waited for that question. I'm sorry, your program is called Junior Innovator. Never.
We had
So,
it first.
yes, we did.
There are no more Q&A right now. Just
Yeah.
wanted to give one final notion in case anyone had a burning question they couldn't wait to an email. So feel free to type that in. Otherwise, we will wrap it up in
Yeah.
say a minute. Again, Andy is available via email. I am as well. Finalized times and logistics will be made available as soon as humanly possible.
Mhm.
And applications are due Friday, June 6th, completely. Your students are responsible for completing them on their
Yeah.
own. Again, this is by students for students. They are going to have to be working independently in and out of the lab to get these projects off and running. So it's important that that starts with the application process.
Yes. Indeed.
And we thank the 36 of you who stayed on. Happy to be able to
Yeah.
support you and your children in the next step of the application. So thank you, Mike. I think we're all set and you can send me the recording.